here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week, it's going to be the turn of the Rockingbirds, because I recently spoke to Alan Tyler about life, love, poetry, and all that other groovy stuff. And just to make it even more exciting, he has just written a book that is going to be published 24th of Feb 2025. I will put a link in the notes below of how you can buy a copy on various platform sites, including Bandcamp. So anyway, you're going to find out more about Alan, the book, and everything else, really. So after several minutes of casual, interesting but casual, well, I'm not sure about interesting, but it was casual chat, we get down to that exciting subject that was the early formative years. Alan, over to you.
Well, in the book, I call myself a Beatles baby, and I was kind of brought up with the explosion of like British beat groups, really. So I really do. It goes right back to listening to "I Want to Hold Your Hand" and "She Loves You," and music like that. The Dave Clark Five. Watching like British TV programs like your Cliff Richards and your Cilla Black shows, and
yes,
even your Scott Walkers and all the rest of it. So I was sort of very immersed in music. I come from quite a musical family. My parents were into amateur operatics, and I write a bit about that. So I was kind of a bit stage struck and around people who would like people who were sort of performers and stuff. Even both my grandmothers, for instance, were piano accompanists. They both, my grandfather on my mum's side was a very good singer, and they sort of had a bit of a kind of a sideline as sort of like semi-professional musicians singing in concerts, doing concerts around North London. So there was that, just the general excitement of pop music in its golden era in the 60s and 70s.
Yes.
Then punk came along, and all of a sudden, something which seemed quite remote, the possibility of being a musician. One wanted to be like, I was an early fan of Elton John because Elton John was really good. But also because he was from Pinner, which was very near to where I lived in Harrow, and it fascinated me that someone who lived near me could actually be a superstar, and so I was starstruck. I write about that in the book.
Yes, because
it seemed a difficult thing to do. By the mid-70s, you got bands like Genesis who seemed, all these sort of like progressive and serious bands who've been musicians who seem to have been around forever, but had only been around for a few years, but that seemed like forever then. And it all seemed like it was all sewn up. And then suddenly punk happened, and all the sort of like all the explosion of bands around the end of the 70s. And then I just started getting involved. And
yes, absolutely. Did you, because you mentioned Cilla there, because I do remember one of the first songs that I thought really excited me was Step Inside Love, which was a very explosive and dramatic song with this amazing chorus, which I suppose decades later it was the blueprint for grunge, really, wasn't it? But then I found it was written by Paul McCartney and John Lennon, and I thought, yes, it all makes sense. This is why that song absolutely rocks. But then we also had things like the Monkees and the Banana Splits and easy listening pop music that seemed very dramatic, as well as the glam period of Sweet Slade, T-Rex, the Osmonds, Crazy Horses. So you'd be a young teenager during that early 70s period. Did that kind of before punk, did that kind of float your boat?
Well, in the early 70s, in that sort of that, by the time you had the teeny bop groups, I was kind of dead set against them. I liked Bowie and I liked sort of glam rock, but then I did kind of have a bit of a serious side. I was a bit of a serious child, probably, and I was quite curious about finding other things beyond the charts. So I would listen to the Alan Freeman show on Radio 1, which was on Saturdays. That's where you could hear the sort of progressive rock bands and your Led Zeppelins and the heavy rock things, which like the slightly older boys at school were kind of into, and you kind of was sort of like you were thinking that was something a bit more heavy and serious and not quite so frivolous. So and then but when punk came along, that just swept that all aside and seemed all really, really passé and boring.
Yes, so you also mentioned that you had a love for football at this stage in the early 70s, mid 70s, and obviously at that time there was the mighty Leeds or the dirty Leeds, there was Liverpool, but you became a Chelsea fan.
Yeah, well, being a contrarian type of person I am, in the 90s, I gave up being a Chelsea fan because
they were too good.
And now I don't allow myself to support anyone because I know it should really be my team through thick and thin, really. So I ended up, I did support Chelsea as a child, but by the 90s, there were so many things about the club that I didn't like that I stopped supporting them.
Did you go to matches at this stage?
Sorry?
Did you go to matches to see at Stamford Bridge?
I did a bit. But I didn't like. I was a bit of a. I didn't like the sort of the ever-present undercurrent of violence, sort of like mid-70s football matches. It just was not for me. I wasn't that kind of kid, So
well, it was terrifying, really.
I remember actually being in the big stand, or the new stand at Stamford Bridge, and having palpitations. I just didn't like it. Also, so many different things I didn't like. I didn't like the ground. Now, actually, look at the pictures of the old ground at Stamford Bridge with the wide open spaces and the big areas behind the goals. It all seems quite like retro and interesting, but at the time I thought it was a right dog's breakfast of a stadium, and I didn't like the owners and all sorts of things, so I ended up not supporting them.
Well, it was also quite interesting because those shots have got all those kind of little mobility vehicles, haven't they? Those little blue, sort of dotted around on the edges, which I don't think many modern football players would want to see, be quite so up close to a three-wheeler mobility, vehicle.
Oh, yes. I mean, they're a bit of a thing of the past. I remember a family friend of ours having one of those. I wanted to go in one, but couldn't get in.
No, it was a whole different ball game. But I do remember growing up and seeing these little things and then people getting out of them and being a bit confused, as you do when you're 10 and not quite sure what it is, and your parents try and distract you by pointing the opposite direction. Yes, it was a weird time, wasn't it? So yes, I did. I looking at the book or flicking through, I did see you'd sort of played football and mentioned the word dubbing, which not many young people remember that smell of putting dubbing on your football boots and around your laces and stitching of.
I only mentioned playing football in the context of me being absolutely useless at it. I was like, and I was enthusiastic. I actually said something I didn't quite explain, and something I can't explain to myself now is why wasn't I any good at sports? There's absolutely nothing wrong with me. I wasn't like that thin or skinny or have any kind of like disability or problem at all. I was a perfectly fit, normal young boy, and I was really like football, and yet I just never excelled it. I was never good at running, and it kind of like it was quite distressing at school when everything really hinges on being good at sports. Really,
Yes.
So much of it does. So I felt sort of quite isolated, and I think it's probably a story of a lot of people who get involved in music. That there's quite a fair proportion of the type of like people like me who are not that successfully socially at school. They're not that they're not popular kids. They kind of like scoot off on their own and listen to music on their own and do things on their own and just sort of like, get into maybe creative things. And then you grow up and you're just doing those creative things is a way to sort of show off to and make friends. And, there's no greater bond apart from perhaps joining the army or something than there is between blokes in a band. It's like not necessarily always blokes. I was in bands that there's a few women in the band that I've been in.
Yes,
very sort of like, it's very much a brotherhood, and that's like something that I didn't really enjoy very much when I was a kid at school.
No, the pressure to be Peter Osgood was probably quite overwhelming, wasn't it, at that stage? Which was so as the 70s progressed, and you would have been getting into that kind of age of being able to go to gigs, in the mid 70s. Who was your first concert that you went to?
Well, apart from Queen in Hyde Park, which was 1975.
Right. So that was the first one.
Went to that was my first concert. That was a free gig. But after that, my first gig that I went to and paid to get in was at the Nashville in probably 1977 or 78. And I went to see the Radio Stars supported by the Stookers. I remember it very, very well.
Yes.
And Andy Ellison jumping around on, leaping around on the speakers. And that was me and my friend Colin McCain, one school pal who, out of everyone I knew at school, he was the only person who was interested in going to a gig. I never got to see any of the big sort of punk bands. I never saw. I really regret, not seeing the Pistols, not seeing the Clash. I did see quite a few, because I saw X-Ray Specs and others, but I didn't see. I didn't see the Pistols. But once I started, I was always a kid who was interested in going into London. It's like one of those Red Bus Rover kids, even when I was about 11 or 12, you get a red bus rover. It was like pay 20p and it was a bus pass and you could travel all around London.
Yes.
Doing that, going around Piccadilly Circus and everything, find friends who do that. So I was always keen to go out to gigs, as soon as I could. And it was also most venues like the Marquee or whatever, they weren't bothered about whether you were underage or whether you could just get a drink, and that was a bonus. But I saw lots and lots of gigs from by the time I was about 16. Going to gigs then.
And when did a musical instrument appear in your life? Because you mentioned you answered an advert in the music shop window in Edgware.
That's right. Yeah, it's all. I mean, my story's all happening around in sort of northwest London, Edgware, Harrow. Not that there was much music scene, that I was aware of going on there at all.
Yes,
everything was channeled into the centre of town. But I started to learn, acoustic guitar when I was about 14. Had a guitar teacher for a little while. My mum wanted to come and learn as well, and then she wouldn't, happily for me, she didn't keep the pace. So I just learned to play acoustic guitar, and then for a little while I did classical guitar, learned to read music a little bit, then got bored with that. And just so I could finger pick, do basics. So the basic elements of acoustic guitar playing I learned when I was about 14, 15, so.
Yeah, because you had a little, was it Johnny Walker moment, sort of arguing against Johnny about his opinion of punk, because it's quite an interesting period, wasn't it? A lot of those DJs were struggling with the new sound that was coming over, and whenever you see little clips of the old Grey Whistle Test, it is quite bizarre seeing people like Keith Christmas sitting there doing some sort of just vocal number about some mythical fairies or something, and with his long hair, and you think, God, at the same time, punk would have been happening, and yet, a lot of those guys were still hanging into that. It's fine if we can hold the faith, we'll stop it happening, but it didn't, did it?
No, I mean, The whistle test was quite good. I mean, they got the New York Dolls on there, didn't they? I mean, they did, but they were quite resistant to punk and so on in the early days. I mean, it was still, you would still, there were various moments when the Pistols were on TV. They were on the, Janet Street Porter's London Weekend show and the notorious Bill Grundy thing.
Yes.
It was still present. There was a lot of controversy and interest around it. Like in the tabloid newspapers and everything. So culturally, it was very, very, very sort of exciting and interesting time. There was the Silver Jubilee, wasn't there, in 1977, the Queen's Jubilee, 25 years.
Yes.
And I remember being in the street where I lived, having a street party, and there was the controversy about whether the Pistols' "God Save the Queen" had really got to number one, but they sort of like pretended that it hadn't.
No, it was Rod Stewart, wasn't it?
Mm.
Yes, he was there, which looked very different to the members of the Pistols doing his Cat Stevens number at that stage. Then did you, at that stage, when you got to 16, which would have been kind of that period, did you stay on for A-levels and then go on to do a degree, or did you leave school at 16?
I did A-levels. Then I was supposed to be going to university, and then I pulled out.
Right.
And decided to take a year off. Did a fanzine called Cool.
Well, I know. And you got some amazing interviews and people in there. You'd got quite a selective taste here, hadn't you?
Well, I was, at that time, I bought the Swell Maps first single. One of the interesting things about, the old bands were so aloof, and you would never even think of writing to a band. I mean, I'd never thought of it. I suppose you might have done, and you might even have got a reply. But the Swell Maps put their home address on the back of their first single. I thought, they actually put their address here. I could write to them. So I made up a questionnaire for them to all fill in. What's your favourite pop group? What's your favourite film? What's your ambition? I don't know. I mean, there's sort of like silly questions like that.
Yes.
And within a week, I got this package back from them, covered in stars and jewels and full of little toys and all the answers to their questionnaires. And it's just the most delightful thing I'd ever received. Mayo Thompson, their producer, from Mayo Thompson from the Red Crayola, he completed a form as well, along with Sue Mailorder, who worked in Rough Trade. And so that was a basis for my first fanzine, which was a few reviews and a few silly stories and things that I wrote about Harrow and stuff. And it was, quite a sort of like, it tapped into the Swell Maps kind of interest in sort of like children's. I cut out pictures from a Look and Learn annual of a boy,
yes.
girl studying, reading books and looking at a goldfish on the. That was the first front cover of Cool. And the Swell Maps had this, they mixed up sort of like this kind of like iconography of children's TV mixed up with Bolan-esque sort of poetic lyrics and so on. And, punky, thrashy guitar sounds, peaking on the meter, sort of like sound, and also mixed up with bedroom recorded B-sides, So I put out this fanzine, got to know lots of other through that, got to know other fanzine writers. There was a big fanzine scene, and there was also quite a few people around who were doing kind of DIY home recordings and sharing them between each other. And the first sort of bands that I got together more on the basis of that, really. I mean, I describe how me and my friend, everyone had a daft name as well. I was Alan T. Wireless. This is all following after the swell maps who'd called themselves Nicky Mattress and then Phones B Sportsman and all these daft names. And so I was Alan T. Wireless. My friend was Paul Platypus, who happened to live down the road, and we got together and started making these tapes up and releasing cassette albums and, sending them out to other people who were doing the same, occasionally getting reviews in fans.
Yes.
Stuff like that. So that's how we sort of like took off. And it was, everything's recorded to cassettes, on little portable cassette machines.
God, that's so beautiful. Did you kind of then, 79, Thatcher gets in, Falkland War, miners' crisis, miners' kind of disaster, and then the Greenham Common. What's it like for you then at this stage? You'd have been hitting 20 at this point in your life, so things developing quite.
Well, this was still going on in like 1979. This is 1979 when I'm doing this. But the swell maps split up in 80. So it's still the 70s when we're doing this kind of like, there's this kind of like undergrounds, it's a scene of bands and individuals swapping cassette albums and generating, photocopying fanzines. But I mean, out of this came, I describe a gig that we did in Watford, where Sad Lovers and Giants, ourselves, Nicky Sudden, and from the Swell Maps, and the Marine Girls. Marine Girls started, on that sort of very sort of like embryonic scene.
Yes,
the Marine Girls were in Hertfordshire, so that was. I remember seeing Tracy Thorne there. I never got to know her, but, they were there. So
I must admit, Sad Lovers and Giants are absolutely amazing band. You must have been thrilled to be on the same bill as the Sad Lovers and Giants.
Well, I don't know. I just took them for granted. I think there's one. I never listened to that. There was a compilation that had a couple of tracks, but I didn't really get in. I sort of moved on quite quickly, and I mean, by the 80s, like 1980, I was getting into the dance stuff. I was getting into like Pig Bag and James Chance,
right?
Because my dad worked for British Airways, I got a cheap ticket to New York and spent 2 weeks in New York and went to Danceteria and the Mud Club and all these funky clubs where I saw bands like the Wallets. I saw James Chance. I don't know if you know much about James.
Yes, and is that James Chance and the Blacks?
Yeah, there's James White and the Blacks.
That's brilliantly confusing.
For a little while, he was like the big hype on the NME in 1979, James Chance, and I was like totally into it as well. I thought James Chance was amazing, but I just like the funkiness. I was moving towards this kind of like, it was gradually. In fact, I was sort of moving away from rock. Really, this is the beginning, and I suppose when I was doing an interview with someone yesterday, there's a sort of continuum from the beginning of the 80s where you've got bands like Pig Bag and Rip Rig and Panic, the Slits, the pop group, a punky band, they were a dance band. I used to really like to dance. And, and then you had the factory bands, A Certain Ratio, and then after... you had New Order as well, who were doing dance stuff. I mean, the absolute seminal Blue Monday, it's like I describe, I was dancing every night to Blue Monday,
Yes.
By the early 80s, when like I was moving away from being interested in rock, which was starting to think was a bit boring, and start listening to sort of like dance music and soul, just went into sort of like this big sort of soul phase, which also tied in with the band I was in at the time, which was a swing band called Take It.
Yes. Well, there was in New York, there was a label, weren't they? Z Records. And
That's
that
right,
was all very, I mean, it just had a lot of interest and rhythms and.
Yeah. Bush
Yeah.
Tetras, bands like that.
Oh, Bush, yes. So, and that whole sort of new wave scene or no wave scene that they had, and it was very different, wasn't it, in the New York world, and New York to anything in London, really. So,
It was that was my first time I sort of participated in sort of a club scene, because you go and see bands in New York, and the band would be on for maybe half an hour, and then it was just like they'd just appear for a little while, and then it would just be a club night. So most of the entire night going till 5 o'clock in the morning, where people just dancing to dance music.
yes,
So it wasn't like going to gigs what I was used to at home, where you would just like you go to a gig. I mean, some gigs there would like 3 acts. Some gigs would be 5. There was, on the Sunday nights at the Lyceum, you could see 5 bands.
well, it was probably
before
more.
this, you see Scritti Politti, the Slits, alternative TV. All these like bands all in a great long row, maybe with Iggy Pop at the top of the bill. Absolutely amazing bills, used to get.
Yes.
Different. It was more of a club scene, and that was the first time. But I didn't really ever. I didn't when that all progressed later and moved into the rave scene. I never really got into.
No. Did you? I mean, at that point, I know you in the book you said you'd moved away from John Peel in '83 and sort of embraced the world of Tony Blackburn. So, did you also enjoy that world that became things like, I suppose, the Robin Miller, the producer, did Sade, and then there was Working Week, and was his
I didn't get into it that much, but I tell you what, I was listening to just yesterday morning the album that Vic Goddard did with Working Week, the Trouble album.
Right.
I think that's like, isn't it Simon Booth or something like?
Right, of course. Simon was in a lot of bands.
That album by Vic Goddard is beautiful, so beautiful, absolutely amazing. Well, I didn't get that far into that, but the band that I was in was kind of we were offered we were in the kind of same sort of zone. I was in this band called Take It. This is in '82, which had been a kind of Raincoatsy type experimental band, which had a female drummer, but by the time I joined them, the guy who was like the mastermind of the band, a guy called Steve Wright. He decided that he wanted us to be a swing band. We were going to be going to swing, and we were going to renew and rejuvenate the classic swing era from the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Write songs in that style. Had a very good sing. We took on a very good sort of like jazzy, singly type singer called Etta, and we tried to write jazz standards, like Cole Porter's sort of standard songs, and we never made a record. But I mean, we were in the similar sort of. So I suppose Working Week, they were kind of like a bit adjacent to where we were.
Yes. And what about Blue Rondo with Chris Sullivan?
Blue Rondo were one of those bands. Well, they hardly made any records, did they? So it was just you read about them and you knew of them, but I never really knew.
But they had great club nights and scenes, didn't they? There was other clubs, weren't there? There was Alice in Wonderland, and there was that kind of new dandy scene, wasn't there? New psychedelia with people like the Bangles and 3 O'Clock, and there was a lot of different tribes happening at that stage as well, where people were harking back to mod Britain, and so did you go into any of those kind of things, or were you, because on this list you've got like your favourite records in '83. You had that classic one, wasn't it? Get Down Saturday Night, and
Oliver
music
Tree.
by D Train, Beat the
I didn't
Street.
go to any clubs where they played that kind of music. I'd never really participated in the scene, so I didn't go to any. I just listened to it on the radio and bought the records. I wasn't part of any. The scene that we were into, our band we were sort of committed to was Bernie Rhodes Club Left. That was the club that we used to go to at the beginning of the 80s. And Bernie Rhodes had set this up as a showcase for Vic Goddard and the Subway Sect, and for a couple of other bands. The other bands, the Subway Sect were the backing bands, and you had Vic Goddard on one night. It was once a week, this club. And then Dick Wayne, who ended up becoming Joe Boxers with the rest of the Subway Sect, and a kind of like torch singer called Lady Blue.
Right.
So the idea of Club Left was that it was kind of like, it was meant to be like a salon. It was meant to be a place not just for music, but for intellectual conversation. It was slightly Gallic, it was a bit sort of like, stripy T-shirts and onion sellers. And
Right, yes.
And guys going around with bow ties. And but I was, I wasn't a very great conversationalist when I was like 18 or 19 years old. Oh, I just used to go and enjoy it, and I loved Vic Goddard. I loved in particular, and I was amazed about how good the new Subway Sect was, with Sean McCluskey on drums, Bostock, and the rest of them. They were a really good group,
right?
And it wasn't, it wasn't.
Was that Songs for Sale, that album?
Yeah.
Right.
Songs for Sale came out in 1982, and it was an absolute flop. Unfortunately, as I say in the book, it was a record that you struggled to find in the shops, let alone in the charts. It was just like, and he left the best two songs that he had, which was Nice on the Ice and Stop That Girl. They should have been on that album because they were the singles, but didn't. Beautiful, lovely song, Nice on the Ice. Absolutely Christmas #1 that never happened because it's just a self-sabotage merchant like me,
Excellent, yes.
But
nice one, yes.
I was looking at his website. He's still making lovely music, Vic Goddard, absolute hero.
Yes. Did he have, was it Mick Jones he did produced one of his last albums?
It might have been. I'm not keeping up with him religiously, so it's possible.
Yeah, but then the indie scene started to appear, didn't it? Because you mentioned the living room, Alan McKee's living room, and Pete Astor and the Loft at this stage as well. So, are you then becoming aware of the rise of the Manchester, the Smiths appearing, and this kind of like new, kind of not movement, but certainly a bit of a different sound, and kids flailing along to Morrissey?
Yeah, well, I was friends with Pete because Pete lived where Take It lived in Hornsey, and so he kind of eventually took Dave Morgan, our drummer, off us when we became a kind of moribund, non-happening band.
Yes,
and so I went along to the living room, which was the incubator of like creation.
Yeah,
McGee's first club. The Loft were called the living room, and then they changed their name to the Loft. And I used to hang around with them, and I remember everyone, like people on that scene, were very excited by the Smiths, and I thought, yeah, the Smiths are a good band, but I was just listening to black music. I was just like, I wasn't actually not interested in indie at all. So you're talking to the wrong person in a way. But by
yes,
the scene starts happening, I'm just going, meh, I don't like that. It's not at all. But then by the time they're sort of like the beginning of the 90s, I'm in Camden and I'm part of the, like the post 86.
Yes.
the Camden scene, blah blah blah. So I'm sort of like I'm watching it go. I'm watching the sort of mid-80s indie scene going on, but I'm not very interested in it.
Yes, but then you got into jazz. You got into tap dancing, didn't you, as well? Which was I haven't met many, people in not indie bands, but you were slightly in an indie band in the 90s, who sort of ever said I've met people who've seen the Beatles, Hendrix, been to Woodstock, but not tap dancing. So how did tap dancing become part of your life?
Well, it was, at Club Left, there was a lot of swingy kind of jazzy sort of like things going on, and I just, as I say, I used to dance around much more than I hang around chatting to people. I don't even remember seeing Bernie Rhodes. I wouldn't even have uttered a word to him, And that club wasn't even that busy most of the time. But anyway, I used to dance a lot, and I used to shuffle my feet around, and I was kind of like I'd got into Fred Astaire movies, things like that. And I thought, and Busby Berkeley movies. And I thought, well, I think I might be good at this. So I started tap dancing, and I was good at it. I was like, it was like the first time I was really good at something.
Fred Astaire.
I ended up tap dancing down the tube station, Green Park Station and Charing Cross Station. And I get fast. I mean, I wasn't really a genuinely great dancer because I'm not athletic. All my talent was in my feet.
Right.
But I could rhythmically tap and improvise and do proper jazz tap in that sense. So
that's impressive. And did you go to Edinburgh Festival at this stage?
Yeah, I got called up to a sort of abortive performance at the Edinburgh Festival, which was a bit of a silly show with a band called 12 Cubic Feet. 12 Cubic Feet were an early living room band. They were Paul Platypus's band, who I'd made tapes with in his bedroom in Darcy Drive in Kenton Harrow. He was in who else was in 12 Cubic Feet? Just for your kind of like family tree.
Yes.
Dave Evans was in 12 Cubic Feet, and he ended up playing with the Mary Chain, for instance. There was a progression there, Dave Morgan also deputised or played a bit with Primal Scream, didn't he? He was with Primal Scream for a while, whilst still with the Loft or the Weather Prophets. I'm not quite sure how that all worked out, but
yes. And then you had a poet friend called Duncan as well, who lived on tin fish and heroin.
Well, Duncan, God rest his soul, I'm afraid. He died a long, long time ago. He was like a poet. Because they all ended up living in Peckham. They wangled on some kind of like mobility scheme, a hard-to-let council flat in Peckham. And Duncan was one of them. There's this guy called Eric. We all went to Edinburgh to supposedly appear in this kind of multimedia show. And I thought, well, what is this show? And in the end, it just amounted to a succession of people doing their party pieces with me standing there like an idiot in front of 3 people in the audience, including one person who was like the reviewer from the Scotsman, just tap dancing to or maybe I was tap dancing to 12 Cubic Feet. But, it wasn't a good show, and it's like kind of embarrassing thing. But we got some lovely accommodation in the university. We had a whole week at the Edinburgh Festival.
Yes.
Absolutely fantastic. You pay like 70p to go and see, a dance show a really high quality dance show to Benjamin Britten's music. It's like loads of theatre, comedy. You mentioned
a Berkoff play, and also Talk
play,
Radio, which I have not met many people who remember the film Talk Radio, and the amazing
Eric Bogosian. Yeah, I think his show was what preceded Talk Radio. He was doing that shock jock shtick.
Yes.
And it was just amazing. Really, really good.
I would imagine. No, I could imagine,
Yeah.
because I thought it was such a
Yeah.
great film, and at that stage there was a lot of alternative cabaret comedy and sort of acts having a go. There was I remember there was a man, the Ice Man, who just melted some block of ice on stage, wasn't there? People who used to smash up records.
I mean, I didn't write about it in the book, but I was actually involved in the sort of like the early alternative cabaret thing, which was like there was a club or a night called Apples and Snakes, and it was based around poetry. And this is like really sort of like 81, and they'd get John Agard, they'd get Benjamin Zephaniah, they get all the people who have like later became famous. John Cooper Clarke would do it, and that was that embryonic time when the whole sort of like alternative comedy thing was happening, and it was the early stages. It was very connected with like poetry cabaret. A lot of the acts would do poetry, funny poems and stuff. And then there was, everything that was going on at the Comedy Store. And
did you meet people like Malcolm Hardy and Raw Sex and Arthur Smith? Were they part of that scene that you kind of vaguely orbited?
I think Arthur Smith might have done some Apples and Snakes. I mean, I wasn't involved. When I say I was involved, it was like my girlfriend's friend who was running it, and I'd just go along. So I didn't know any of these people. I mean, my sort of thing, I tend to kind of like lurk around and sort of like watch what's going on my book isn't full of like real sort of insider stories of like, my 3-day bender with
Malcolm.
With someone out of Oasis or anything like that. I tend to just like be kind of like on the periphery, watching everything that's going on with a certain amount of amusement and
but there was a lot in that 80s period. There was a lot of cooperatives, weren't there, and art clubs and art venues, and then you'd have people like the Pogues appear, or the Men They Couldn't Hang, lots of benefit concerts, and then you had Red Wedge, with people like Junior, Billy Bragg, Gary Kemp, and the Redskins. So people got quite pulled together during that period as well, and you must have been. I say you must, but were you around that scene? Because you were in London, and you obviously.
Well, I remember. I mean, I would go to the George Robey. I lived in North London. I would go to the George Robey. I remember seeing the Pogue. Actually, you know what? I actually watched. I think my friend supported the Pogues in the Robey, and I went to see them, and then I stood in the bar and the whole Robey just got completely taken over by lunatics, just going absolutely shit ape. And I just looked at I don't think I'm Irish folk. I don't think I like that. So I didn't bother with silly me.
It won't catch on. It just won't.
It's not on that fun, a kind of like a slight sort of like a mixture of snobbery and being just a booze hound, wanted to stand by the bar.
Yes.
But yeah, I saw that the Robey was a great one, and there was like later on there was a club called Club Dog. You ever heard of?
Oh yes.
Which was a real sort of like grebo-y, very alternative, very sort of squatty, very hippie mecca. It really was.
Because you've got a chapter called Cowboys in Camden Town, don't you? Yeah. Which is, and you mentioned these great gigs.
Yeah, I mean, that's by sort of 89. I'd moved to Camden, and Club Dog and the Robey had been going for quite a few years by then. It was quite a well-established thing by 89. It didn't, it's probably a bit on its decline. I don't know. No, come to think of it, it probably kept going.
Had you gone to any festivals or seen or taken acid listening to Hawkwind at Stonehenge?
No, I had a few friends who went to Glastonbury and reported back. I never went to a festival until 1992 when the Rockingbirds got booked.
Right.
First time I went to a festival, the first time I went to Glastonbury or any other festival was that in 1992 when we played in the acoustic stage.
Yes.
So,
In comfort.
Andy Hackett in the band, various other people. Andy Hackett was kind of like been every year, one of those I go every year sort of people.
It wasn't as good as the first one. I know, Andy.
But no, I didn't. Though I remember. So through the 90s and the next decade after that, I went to Glastonbury quite a lot.
Well, yes, absolutely. Look, 87, one of the most important years of music. It was amazing. This is the birth of the Rockingbirds, isn't it?
87.
Yes.
Yeah, just about. Yeah, I'm just about finishing at college. And I'm, more like 88, I suppose. It's around that sort of, it's around the time of the Stone Roses' first album, when the Stone Roses are getting going. I remember that sort of associating that with the house I was living in Bounds Green. Yeah, there was kind of prehistoric Rockingbirds that when I was still living outside Camden with a few friends. We're gonna have a get together. Actually, we're having a book launch sort of like gig at the 23rd and the 23rd of February at the Betsy Trotwood. Just getting a little plug in there. We're going to be doing some of the early Rockingbird songs, and that was actually it was country influenced, but we were quite indie really. And I think that's one of the interesting things about the Rockingbirds. Though we were aimed to be country and all this, that was like the idea. We weren't really schooled in like we were just kind of like we were just indie kids who having a bash, you know.
Because that chapter you've got a brief prehistory of the Rockingbirds. There's an interesting bit about the housing cooperative. And talking about Sade and Robert Elms as well. So you obviously, because I know one of the things that my theory about why there's so many bands from the 80s was that Social Security was very good, easy at that stage, and you had job seekers allowance, enterprise allowance schemes, your rent paid and council tax all taken care of, and you had happy hour at the pub. So what not to like? You could survive on £38 a week.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with Mark Fisher, the sort of like cultural commentator.
Oh, yes.
I mean, some of his videos are good, where he talks about how supportive, we were still living off the benefits of social democracy as it was then,
Yes.
There was still, you could still squat places. You could still sign on and get away with it. You could do what we were doing, which wasn't exactly squatting, but we were in housing, like short life housing co-ops, where a little co-op goes to the council and the council gives us a license to live in a dilapidated house for 6 months, and there were tons of them in Haringey, where we were based, and it was obviously gave people much more liberty, to pursue what they, creative things. You could, there might be a spare room in your house. You might be able to make a little studio, music studio, art studio. People, had opportunities. That everything now, where everything, there's always someone looking at Google Earth, monetizing every square meter of land in the country. Everything's accounted for and everything is monetized. Wasn't like that then. There was still, you could still get things cheap. You can get some things cheap now, but you could live cheaply. You could, become a cycle courier, which is what I was, in the late 80s. Make enough money, make a bit of money, do what I want, buy a guitar, hang out, go to the pub, have a nice life,
Yes,
not ambitious, and get a band together,
Could you meet a guy called Miles, don't you? Was this Irishman with a French-sounding name? Yes, that was quite interesting because you said he knew the Miami show band.
Yeah,
who had been famous for being massacred in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Yeah, that was. I mean, I was at the North London Polytechnic, and that's where I met Miles. And there was another guy called Malcolm who was like this, kind of semi-genius philosopher guy who had learned the entire catalogue of Robert Johnson and could play it all and sing it all. But Miles was my mentor when it came to getting me into country music.
Right.
This kind of diminutive, slightly nervous, but very, very erudite guy who's like read all the sort of like all the philosophers, all the classic canonical books. So it seemed anyway to me. I was very impressed with him. And he sort of introduced me to the cosmic American country music, the Graham Parsons and the International Submarine Band, and I just started to absorb that, and I got into Elvis as well, and that was the beginning of my sort of interest in country music, and that's whether the ideas were.
Because I'm glad you mentioned, because you mentioned the usual, Emmylou Harris and Graham Parsons, but also Nancy Griffith, who I became slightly obsessed with in that sort of 80s to early 90s before it all got a bit overproduced. But yes, then there was Elvis and Sun Records and the Big O and Jerry Lee Lewis. So this is where your musical direction totally changes, isn't it?
Yeah.
No more black funk.
Given music a rest after the swingy jazz stuff that I was doing. Gone to not university, Polytechnic in North London to do philosophy, and just hung out there. Wasn't in a band. Wasn't trying to be in a band. And only towards the end of the 3 years did I start sort of hankering to sort of like do some more music, and country music seemed to be the interesting genre that I'd kind of dismissed previously, but was beginning to sort of see that this was something that was maybe an opportunity that perhaps nobody else, not many other people had taken seriously from a musician from an English background like myself. And I just said, so that was kind of enticing for me. And I just sort of thought, here's an opportunity. I mean, I think with the Rockingbirds, there was a kind of like, there was a love of the music, obviously. The excitement of getting into Hank Williams and all the great country artists, and it was a wonderful sort of like moment in my life when I was, these huge panoramas of music were opening up for me, just as they had in the early 80s when I was getting into jazz and soul. But this is another thing, and but there was also a kind of like a bit of business acumen, which was like, hey, we could do with country music what maybe the Stones and the Beatles did with American R&B. This could be massive. We're like, which obviously didn't happen.
No,
but it was happened. Maybe it might have happened if it had been someone more genuinely talented. But I was a Bengal lancer. I was a chancer. I was like, I'm one of those people, like a bit like Vic Goddard, and if I may make the comparison, someone else who's got a book out at the moment or written about him, Lawrence from Felt and Go Kart Mozart, who was an old friend of mine, I would like to say. No, I do know Lawrence quite well. He's a wonderful guy, and I just love his music. But he's like me in that, in many ways, but one of them is he can't play guitar. I mean, he's worse than me on that front. He's not. He doesn't really bother to play guitar.
But luckily, he had a very good guitarist in quite a few of his bands, didn't he? I can't remember his name, but he did have a very good guitarist, didn't he, that he used to play with a lot.
What you mean, Lawrence? What with Denham?
Yeah, who was Lawrence's guitarist that he...
Neil Scott.
There was somebody else. What was...
D-Bank.
Yes.
All right, yeah.
Did you ever meet D-Bank?
Was the original Felt guitarist.
Yes.
I actually didn't really like early Felt very much. I thought they were a bit wishy-washy. I thought he hit his stride with Me and the Monkey and the Moon when he had Duffy and Neil Scott playing with him. And they carried on, or Neil Scott carried on through Denim for quite a while. But,
Well, I love that. One of the greatest songs ever was the one which he does called Osmonds by Denham, which is just, a musical
Yeah,
masterpiece.
we loved that. I mean, Sean from the Rockingbirds does backing vocals on the Back in Denim album and Denim on Ice. So we were very proud of Sean's being on that.
Yes,
And we used to bore. I think Dave Evans, who I mentioned earlier, 12 cubic feet, chain, became the driver for the Rockingbirds. I think he might have got a bit fed up with us playing first Denim album over and over again. But I thought it was absolutely fantastic.
Yes,
I really went for the Denim thing.
Yes. So getting the Rockingbirds together, it was a lovely local Norwich connection, actually, isn't there? Because you've got Andy Hackett, but also Patrick on slide guitar.
Yeah.
So, because I'm from Norwich, so
I see. Okay.
could see Patrick literally 200 yards down the road until they moved.
You know Patrick?
Well, only by sight, but I sort of probably say hello to his partner more than Patrick because she's quite sort of
now, but yeah,
she's quite buzzy. So so you sort of managed to collect this group of musicians together. Who I believe he was the guitarist in Hank Wankford's band for a while.
I think he did for a little bit. I think he did a little, not very, perhaps not that much, but
yes,
yeah. But yeah, he was playing guitar, but then he got into pedal steel, and we took him on.
Yes, and you had a very good look, didn't you? I mean, quickly got the image, got the attitude, got the sound. I mean, it all slips into place really quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we were quite keen on getting our. I mean, we had some quite. We had Dave Golding, Greenwood Golding, who'd been in The Weather Prophets with Dave Morgan.
Yes,
it was quite a cool looking dude. We weren't entirely sort of wearing cowboy clobber, which I observe in the book can be a bit of a bad look if everyone's trying to look like a cowboy. We had Dave Morgan looking in his sort of leopard print jacket and leather trousers, looking more like a member of the Cramps, you know. And so we weren't all wearing, cowboy shirts, but I mean, yeah, we mixed up things like cowboy, studded shirts, plaids. We mix them up with, Ben Sherman shirts that sort of classic British stylings, the Fred Perrys and so on. We put them in Crombie coats.
yes.
Hackett would wear a Crombie coat or even some tweed, So
and a lot of hair. There was a lot of hair in that band as well, wasn't there? You had that sort of 70s look.
We were much generally hairier than other bands, yeah.
You were going to always win that contest. So your first single, the first time you go into the studio, or the first single is your Good Girls Gonna Go Bad. This features Leslie from Silverfish on guest vocals. And yes. So why did you go for a Tammy Wynette song?
It was actually the people at Clawfist suggested it. Well, the reason they suggested it was we had one of our ideas. Instead, we had worked up our normal Rockingbirds set, but we thought it would be fun to do a Rockingbirds rolling review where we would get different guests from the Camden, mainly people who are around Camden, to sing country songs with us as the backing band.
Right.
Tom from the Faith Healers did Love Sick Blues. Leslie from Silverfish did Your Good Girl's Gonna Go Bad. And those were two of the songs that were part of a bigger show that we put on and played. I think we did it 2 or 3 times first at the Bull and Gate, then at the Borderline. Maybe that was it until until 1992. We did another one headlining the second stage at Reading, at the Reading Festival on the Sunday in 1992. This is when we'd been signed, and we ended up doing a rolling review with, I think Leslie from Silverfish and Tom probably did it as well, but we had a few more heavyweight people with us. We had Edwin Collins, we had Vic Goddard, and we had Suggs as well. And we played to a moderate crowd, on being a headline band on the Sunday at Reading. But we had a slight problem that we were in competition with the band that were on the main stage, which is Nirvana.
Yes.
Possibly the most famous gig by any band at a British festival. It's a legendary final last hurrah of Nirvana, isn't it? And there was the Rockingbirds toiling away.
Yes, doodling,
overdrunk and not turning in the best performance, perhaps, of one of our Rockingbirds roller reviews, while Nirvana were making rock history on the main stage.
With Patrick on the slide guitar. Yes, it's going to be a difficult one.
And of course, it's like these days can be quite long. It's going to be a bit of a long day. So we start off in the pub, leaving for, I suppose Reading is not that far, but it's sort of like early in the afternoon. In the Sussex Arms in Covent Garden, for some reason we met up there, probably because the Heavenly office was there.
Yes,
we probably had a bit too much to drink, and it was a bit of an underwhelming experience in the end.
I would imagine. So look, then you signed to Heavenly. This must have been a real scoop for you guys. I've got a lovely book on Heavenly Records somewhere here, which came out. Oh, Believe in Magic. Yeah, Heavenly recording the first 30 years by Robin Turner. Yes. Yeah. So this must have been a dream to sort of get onto quite a sexy little label.
Yeah, absolutely. I write in the book about how we were on the Camden scene. Jeff Barrett had, prior to me moving to Camden, he'd been putting on gigs at the Falcon on a night under the name of the Phil Kaufman Club. Phil Kaufman being the legendary manager of Graham Parsons and Nancy Griffith,
right,
and Jonathan Richman. He was their road manager, and so I sort of thought, who is this Jeff Barrett geezer? He's obviously into the right stuff. Some of his friends started coming along to the Falcon to see us. Guys from East Village. His girlfriend, Val, used to come along and see us. He remained, Jeff Barrett, who ran the label, remained a bit elusive. But we had him in our sights, really. I was working as a cycle dispatch rider as well, and picking up packages from his office on Hatton Garden when he was sharing up the offices with the guys from Creation. And so we sort of had his number. We just wanted to be on Heavenly. That was it. We just wanted to be on Heavenly. And eventually it all came together, and our Heavenly became our angels. They came and looked after us, and they put out our first single. They totally believed in us, and they got a big major label deal with Sony via Rob Stringer. We had money for the first time, and I was well off, and everything was.
And you worked on that first album. That first album, you had Alan Winstanley and Clive Langer.
Yeah.
What was that like? Because they'd worked obviously with Madness, Julian Cope, Elvis Costello, China Crisis, Marilyn, all the greats.
It was Clive Langer. We were working in their studio. Clive Langer was the producer. Alan Winstanley wasn't really involved, although he did do a few mixes towards the end. But Clive Langer was our producer. Just very nice bloke, Clive Langer.
Yes.
I mean, he used to say that we got our songs all very tightly worked out already. And so he didn't really feel that a lot of the time, he didn't feel that much liberty to make that many changes. He did make some, but he did make some useful changes on Gradually Learning, which is the lead track, which is the track that we became a single, and we did a video for it in Austin. Clive had connections in Austin, Texas, some musicians that he'd worked with before. So me and Clive and Jeff Barrett from Heavenly went out and did some additional recording with banjos and fiddles, a horn section to, big up the record. And so in 1992, we're a touring band. We're doing lots of festivals. Glastonbury was the first one, and then Reading and various other ones. And it was all, so that was great. I mean, Clive Langer, very affable, very nice,
yes.
Very capable.
Beautiful man. But you did sort of hang on to a review from Kathy Unsworth, didn't you? Who said you were missing the you were sort of missing the dark melancholy irony that made country music good. Did that slightly sting?
Well, it was kind of a bit like calling not liking the Beatles for being tuneful, I mean, we weren't gothic, we weren't dark, we were sort of like kind of cheerful, we were just like quite bright and breezy. We weren't delving into the dark underside of of things. So that was just how we were. So we didn't expect goths to like us. We wanted people who like the Birds, to like us, and people who like Dylan to like us,
Yes, well, absolutely. So you did one album with
the
Heavenly
Mamas and the Papas or something like that, people who like we had a kind of like easy listening. We were very into the Carpenters and even Burt Bacharach and things like that. I was very into like the Bread, shit like that.
We love Bread. But I have to say, the Carpenters, massive fan, and also Burt. I remember seeing him when he was with Elvis Costello. They did an album together and did a couple of dates in London, and I had to go and see it because both Elvis and Burt Bacharach were just huge factors. But the Carpenters, and you mentioned Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, don't you, in the book, Elton John's album, which, again, I think is a musical masterpiece with songs like Roy Rogers and Harmony and those sort of quite, evocative sort of songs, which...
very long time since I properly listened to that. I should probably have another listen to it.
Have a blast one day.
You remind me of the sort of more obscure songs that were probably quite fun to listen to,
Yes, well, I know. Side 3s and 4 on Goodbye Yellow Brick Road is still stunning. So then you did the one album with Heavenly, then you go to Cooking Vinyl, and then you have Edwyn Collins, producer. What was because this is the mid-90s. We're in the heart of the major years here, aren't we? We've slightly crept out of recession, and we have the Britpop period. Murray Lackland Young is doing his poetry and is bigging it up. Cocaine, Champagne. It's a good time. What was it like for the band at this stage?
Well, I mean, I suppose it was with the band really. In '92, when the first record had been made, I felt in a way that I'd done everything I wanted to do. I had a bit of a kind of like romantic idea about it all. And I kind of was, there's a sort of theme through the book about, obviously there's got How to Never Have a Hit, that is what the book's about. It's why, what I did wrong, and I would say I really just dreamed of making one great album, and then just that would be fine. That would just be it. That would just be amazing. I don't really, and I'm not saying the first Rockingbirds record album was a great album, but with certainly a lot of people around us at the time telling us that it was. We got this amazing press, not from everyone, but from a lot of people. And, with something like Enemy's 16th best album of the year or something like that, it's quite high up in their ratings. And I just kind of felt I was had this sort of airy-fairy sort of idea. I didn't. I think there's a sort of with me. I love being in the band on the one hand, but sometimes I always wanted to walk away from it. It's very hard being in the band. I like to have my time to myself on my own, and I want to sort of wander off. And I like someone like Andy Hackett, our guitarist. He just loves company. He loves to have someone. He won't do anything on his own. He'll go find someone to go. Whereas if I wanted to go do something, I'd just go on my own. Anyway, I just kind of didn't have that long-term plan to take it on. And in that 1992 year, I only wrote one song. There was a lot of drinking going on, a lot of stupidity. A lot of some really good gigs, but a lot of not very good gigs, just because we were drunk and just being stupid. And I suppose it was very and I'd kind of had this dream of I had this mythical place that I dreamed up that I got a dream about, called Agaristo, and Agaristo was named after a horse that I dreamed, and actually, Devon and Exeter, number 14, and the horse actually won. I missed putting a bet on it, but then after that, I decided that Agaristo was a place and somewhere where I would escape to and get away from, disappear once my album was made. I'd disappear to Agaristo and go there. So I thought it was somewhere in Texas. So when we went to Texas, I was looking for Agaristo and looking in the phone books and thinking, where's Agaristo? Is it a restaurant? No, I don't know. You ask people. So then I come, I thought I might walk out into the desert, like Harry Dean Stanton.
Yes, absolutely. Wandering with this.
Because we'd finished the record then. And I was I'm going to walk out the desert. And then I get to Texas, Austin, Texas. There isn't a desert. There's no desert, there's nowhere to walk out into. So I just come back. And I just kind of I lost my vision, really. I lost the vision of what I wanted to do. I had this big plan, make this great album, bing, bang, bong. And then it sort of was all disappointment. So there's a long tail off. I just didn't really start. People started leaving the band. Dave Morgan left the band. I was getting, still not. I was having good moments when I was writing and producing stuff, but it was laborious. So after 3 years, we sort of accumulated enough material to make a second album, and we knew Edwin, and so we went ahead, and eventually we were guinea pigs in his new studio, because he got into. He'd sunk him and his wife, Grace, had sunk all their money, everything they had, into this new studio in Wood Green. We were the guinea pigs, make an album, sounds great in the studio. Then we get home, listen to the mixes. Didn't sound that good. Didn't understand why it didn't quite sound that good. And then we go back to Edwin and Grace. Me and Hackett, and it doesn't really sound, just sounds a bit, I don't know. What do you think? And they're just going, I think it's fine. And so that wasn't very convincing. The album came out. We did some other recording in Bark Studio where we worked before, where Denham had recorded. That sounded better to me. the album didn't do that much. Sold a few thousand copies on cooking vinyl, but that was it really. We've just run out of steam, and Hackett wanted to leave, Sean wanted to leave, and that was by 1995. Just we'd run our course really. So it was a depressing sort of time, long hiatus before I did anything. Did solo records.
Yes, because you mentioned Shakespeare's, was it The Seven Ages of Man, and you were hanging on to your second age, the young man.
Yeah, then I had a I had a kid, but by the end of the millennium, and that was sort of like my very long extended young adulthood came to an end when I was about 39. Became a father and began my life again, really.
Yes. Did you get a job? What was your next career move at that stage? Did you go into the media?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a chapter called In Tall Buildings.
Yes.
Because that was one of the songs that we used to do, the John Hartford waltz in Tall Buildings. Very beautiful song about a hippie who sells out basically all his dreams and ideals. This is one of those, and goes and works in an office. And this is one of the Rockingbirds' big songs. It was actually one of the two songs that we did on later with Jules Holland, which I sort of cocked up a bit and describe in the book that I couldn't bring myself to watch it. I was absolutely indignant, very unhappy with it. I don't think Jules, as nice a man as he was, and he gave me his phone number and everything, I don't think we weren't very convincing that day in the studio. Anyway, so so in Tall Buildings, I end up working in. I worked in a very strange place called Speedex News.
Yes,
it was a media monitoring firm, which was basically we used to pirate. We used to record all the television programs and try and sell. It was a cuttings agency, and we used to sell videos and transcripts to various clients. It was like just before the sort of computer age. It was all done on domestic. So, I mean, it's difficult to sort of explain it, really. It's a part of the book that I'm very proud of, actually. I think it's quite funny. It was a funny firm run by this Asian guy who called himself Peter Johnson, but was actually, his real name was Vidya Anand. And he was like ambitions and went out and gave lectures to the Chinese Communist Party and had a personal audience with General Gaddafi and this kind of stuff. So, I mean, that was in the book. That's a way of obviously telling about me, and then I later go and work in the civil service, and there's my reflections on what my experiences were there.
Yes,
all of these are like I'm proud of the book in a way because perhaps it's got a bit of a scope slightly wider than your average rock memoir. It's not all just stories about drunken and stupid drug-taking antics on the road.
No,
there is that, but there is also these other things which kind of like describing working in that little office for Speedex News and watching the programs that we were watching on TV and recording, and it's just a little window into the world that we were living in, the epoch, really. And so I'm quite proud of that sort of aspect of it.
So when does music start to come back? Because I noticed, because one of the people that I really like, mainly because John Peel played her obsessively, was Laura Cantrell. And she sort of appears in the book, doesn't she, as a... Is it somebody that was on a friend's record label, Shoeshine Records?
Laura Cantrell came up. She was one of the... she comes up in the book because after the Rockingbirds are finished and my other band, Famous Times, are sort of like coming to an end as well. That was a very short-lived band that I had after the Rockingbirds. me and Sean started this sort of pub Sunday free music gig called Come Down and Meet the Folks. And that's still going now. Not every week now, as it was then. But then it was in a pub called the Engine Room, which was on opposite the Roundhouse. And the governor, it was at the time when it had been up until through most of the 90s, the old Sunday licensing laws had been, that you could only drink between 12 and 2 in the afternoon on a pub. And they relaxed that and allowed pubs to open all afternoon. And so the guy who ran the Engine Room asked me to put on a music afternoon in the pub. So me and Sean did it. And we sing a few songs ourselves. We had some Technics decks, brought our own records. Then a few people used to. It was right in the heart of Camden. And just like this scene developed, we find bands to put on. We want them to be country bands if we could, but there weren't very many country bands that you could put on.
Yes.
So like blues bands and things like that. James Hunter would play, Little George. James Hunter, all these sort of like bands on the sort of like Camden rocking scene would do it. We'd sing, and it just went, and then it moved from there to another pub and to another pub and to another pub, and this just went on with me and Big Steve from the Arlenes running it for the most part every Sunday, and we just like this music scene developed for us. So I got to know musicians. I got to know a guy called Paul Lush, who was a guitar player, who turned up out of the blue and said, "I'm a guitarist. Do you want a guitarist?" I said, "Yeah, I ain't got a guitarist at the moment. We start a band called Alan Tyler and the Lost Sons of Littlefield, and that's my next sort of country rock venture."
Right.
Next band. So through, after that sort of point where my young adulthood ends and I become a father and we go into the next millennium, although I don't have any sort of like significant commercial success after that at all, I'm actually fairly productive. I've made more records after in that 20-year period than I did in the previous 20-year period, but the first half of my musical career. I've made quite a lot of records, and
yes, and you've got
quite recently
an amazing amount of solo albums, and
there's
Tyler and the Lost Sons of Littlefield
all together, and a book.
And a book.
So it's not bad, is it? It's not. It's not phenomenal. Not like some people I know, like Darren Hayman, who makes like a record every few months. No, but
no,
it's not too shoddy. It amounts to my achievement, as I say, and success is relative, but achievement is absolute.
Yes. So then in 2008, Heavenly asked you to reform the band. Was that something that you were aware of the 18th anniversary was coming up? Or...
Yeah, I think it was the 21st, wasn't it? I don't know. I mean, they just asked us to do the gig, so we said yes. And then it seemed like, we did the gig at the South Bank in the Queen Elizabeth Hall, supporting Edwyn Collins. When there was obviously a full house, and it seemed like the Lost Sons of Littlefield were a good group, but we were struggling to attract audiences, not selling many records. And I thought, well, the Rockingbirds have got a better profile.
Yes,
we should maybe just do that. So that's what we did. And so, in the course of time between then and now, the Rockingbirds have made 2 more albums following the first 2 albums that we did before we split up.
God, that's impressive. Yes, so that's quite nice. You've got this extra little bit that kind of comes together. Yeah. So you did one in 2013, The Return of the Rockingbirds. Where was that recorded?
It was recorded mainly, partly in Chris Clark's studio, and then he left the band, and we recorded bits of it else in other studios after that.
Yes.
And then more Rockingbirds, which came out about 10 years ago.
No, that was 2019.
Oh, right. No, yeah. Yeah, but it was recorded a few years before that because it
Right.
just sat on the shelf for about 3 years because we were a bit moribund, really, to be honest. Although it's a good record, there's some really nice tracks on more Rockingbirds. No, not talking it down. There's some really good tracks on there.
Yes. Did you prefer at that stage to be making kind of more solo albums where you had complete control?
I suppose it's easier to do. It's easier to do. I mean, I got into doing it in the end. I bought a programmable synthesizer, an OP1 synthesizer, and I got into like doing it a real sort of like DIY electronic music, which my last 2 solo albums have basically been. And as I describe in the book, I got the idea of doing that because 30 years before, in the 80s, while I was doing that sort of swingy jazz thing with Take It, I was also fiddling about with Roland programmable bass and drum synths and stuff, and composing music on that, which came to an end when my stuff got burgled. So I packed it in. But I enjoyed it then and thought, well, I'd actually quite like to muck about with some synthesizers and have a different approach and do a DIY thing. So that's what I did.
So was that the last solo album was made in Middlesex? Was that the last? Yeah. That was the last album you did. So then
before that, El Tapado, which was the first of the electronic ones.
Yeah. God damn. So then the book, when did you decide that you needed to get it out there and have the commitment and publish it or write it?
Well, I described in the sort of prologue how the precise moment when I have the idea for the book, because I'd always sort of said, I'm not going to write a book. No, I'm a songwriter. I'm not going to bore people with my book. But then I was sort of sitting on the Bakerloo line going to work, listening to some Hank Williams songs, and I come across a book. I always struggle to remember what the name of the song is. It's not a song by Hank Williams. It's just an old recording because it was like the complete Hank Williams that I was listening to, because we were getting ready for a Hank Williams 100th anniversary gig later on in the year. And as I listened, my random play arrived at how to write folk and Western music to sell, referring not to a song but to a book. This recorded curiosity is taken from an old radio show, with the presenter conducting a scripted conversation with a hillbilly Shakespeare. So I hear him sort of like talking in his hillbilly way about this book that he's written, telling all the good people back home how to write songs.
Right.
Maybe you may have a song in your dresser drawer, and maybe it could become a hit one day. He's got the book to explain all his songwriting tips. And at that moment, I just thought, well, he's one of the greatest songwriters, successful songwriters who ever lived, writing a book for $1, telling people how to have a hit. I'm a songwriter who's never had a hit. Maybe why don't I write a song about that? And it's a stupid idea. Obviously, I've got no great fan base. I've got no, but I do have a kind of constitution. I have a lot of connections. I mean, my book isn't out yet. I've already sold 200 copies. more than, more like 250. I mean, that's a start. And getting my money back, and there's, and getting people coming back to me and saying that they've really enjoyed the book. So that's wonderful. Once I got the idea of the book, I just there and then just started writing it. Right
Yes.
there on my phone, typing ideas into my phone, and I just absolutely just went. It just vomited forth. It was just an amazing experience. And in 3 months, I'd got a first draft, and then the bulk of the book was written in that 3 months. And then it was just like gradually putting feelers out, asking a friend to help me have a read of it, see what he thinks. What can we do? Got a proper first draft together. Sent it out to a few people. They were enthusiastic. I sent it to John Niven, who's an old friend of the Rockingbirds, friend of mine. He's an author, successful author. He comes and I ask him if he'd write a preface, not a preface, a foreword. He says yes straight away before he's read it. Thank you very much, John Niven. You're a good friend. Then I send him the manuscript and he says it's good. And I send it to other people and they say it's good. So I'm thinking, oh, man, great. Okay. So let's try and find a publisher. That's more difficult. Because who is this guy? He's not, and he's writing a book about how to never have a hit. It's obviously red flags to the publishing industry. They want someone who's famous and got lots of fans. They want to put a book out. So fair enough. In the end, I gave myself until September last year to find a publisher. And in the background, I was looking into how to self-publish. And, you can get a very nice book self-published now. You don't have to, you just pay copy by copy. Each one costs, whatever, not that much.
Yes.
And you can do it. So I thought, well, why don't we stop pissing about? The books, people are telling me the book's good. They say it's funny and it's interesting. I like it. I want to put it out. So I'll just put it out.
Put it out. Just got to get it done.
We are.
It's got, and I've got your website here. You've got dates all through to the summer, so hopefully you got more dates, more books. God, it's going to be brilliant. I have to say, it's going to be a good time, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, and now it's providing a nice little framing for me to sort of like do gigs, and I've got an Alan Tyler How to Never Have a Hit show, which is going to be 2 sets. I had a band called the Alan Tyler Show, which was kind of like do 2 sets, all the best songs that I, cherry pick all the best songs of my career, and
yes,
and do covers that I like. But now I've got the book. I'm doing a sort of show where there's a few all the songs from the book, including not just the Rockingbirds and my later solo stuff, but also the a few of the swingy jazz numbers and so on that I did with Dave Morgan in the original Take It, which is really good fun to do. Really nice, like, where we obviously were actually a good band, There's quite like a decent song, a few songs that we put out. And so those songs will be interspersed with little readings from the book. And it's going to be a show, it's show business.
We're tap dancing.
And we're tap dancing. I screwed taps to my cowboy boots today.
Good.
It's going to happen.
It's going to happen. This is all very exciting. I think you must have also noticed there's been a lot of people writing books or sort of, there was a guy from the Faith Healers, Joe, the drummer, who brought out this photographic book of that scene from his kind of period in the 80s and 90s. I don't know why I've just mentioned that one, but that's quite niche and obscure, but people love it. Everyone's writing their memoirs now of that 80s, 90s period. There's documentary films, exhibitions, everything now. So I think you're on the zeitgeist. People are curious now, aren't they? And they're going to go back and listen to those early albums again with excitement. And I think people will absolutely flock to it. Actually, that's my feelings.
Well, thank you. I'm feeling very positive. It's given me something to do. I mean, I've got the whole year to sort of promote the book. I'm completely focused on doing it. I've got gigs to do. I've got, musicians to work with, rehearsals to go to.
Yes.
People,
And do you have sort of
people to stand
potentially
up like you.
do you have potentially new material that you might be looking to record again?
That I do not have.
I never
No,
will.
I've completely focused on the book, and I haven't written any songs for a couple of years. I must admit, it's not the first time I've had a fallow period.
Fair enough. So if people,
I think I'm a project guy. I do sort of like to have a project, and in a way, the Rockingbirds were a project. It's like, an idea. So the book is the idea now, and the book is a way of like reframing what I've done in the past and putting shows together. I haven't got a big idea beyond that, so I haven't really been writing songs. I don't just sort of like write songs in my sleep. Really, I decide I'm going to do an album, and I do it.
yes. And the best place for people, I've got the link to your website. Is it Bandcamp then? You can buy books as well as download MP3s and buy records.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the book comes out on the 24th of February, but I don't know when this program's going to come out. But the book is actually on sale now. I'm selling signed copies of the book,
right,
off my Bandcamp site. So that's going very, very nicely at the moment. And I've nearly got my investment back on because although the books don't cost that much, I'm not buying, paying a huge amount of money on printing and so on. It does cost some money.
well, absolutely.
Sorry?
Absolutely. It's always going to. And what about Amazon? You've got it on Amazon as well, haven't you?
It's on Amazon. Rough Trade are going to be selling signed copies from the 24th. So it should be out there, it's going to be it should be in the shops to a certain extent. I don't know if I give them enough discount for them to want to put it in many shops, but it's eminently buyable.
Well, absolutely.
I'm very prompt at putting them in the jiffy bag. I put them in on the day. If you get on my Bandcamp, you'll get it with a bit of luck. You get it the next day.
Yes, well, it is lovely, and you've got some great pictures and other bits and pieces that decorate it with great, evocative vibes, really, isn't it? And did you on a sort of emotional, spiritual level, did it feel a little bit like you've processed stuff, let go of stuff at the same time when you got to that point where you thought, wow, I've had to relive some of that moments in my life, which having to put it down on paper must have been quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I mean, it is very much a sort of like straightforward memoir. I didn't do very much research. I did do a little. I did have a couple of conversations with people to try and remember a few things, but literally like a couple, really. And then
Yes.
I fact-checked it amongst the band, but I didn't do research. It was just sort of like a splurging out of what was inside me. And also that probably means that there's, the quirks of memory and recollection never being that reliable. It may be a bit wrong, but not not hopefully in a way that will trouble anybody.
No.
So I don't know. Is it like I've not had any. Also, the way I've written it is I've done it as a kind of it's a bit I make myself the butt of the joke. It's not a sort of like a memoir that dishes the dirt and criticizes other people very much.
Yeah.
tells a story of what some people did, and some people do other than myself, do silly things in the book, But I think most of them are big enough and sort of like to share my sense of humour, and are perfectly happy so far to sort of like have the stories out there, So I just, I don't know. It wasn't hard work, really. It hasn't been, but it was intense. It's like, and I'm constantly, and I'm not writing it anymore. That's finished. All the time I was writing it, it does completely consume you,
Yes.
Wherever you go, or whatever you do,
It's there.
And then thinking, wanting to, like even when I'm in church or something like that, I'm sort of like thinking, oh my God, I've had another idea for my film. Write it down on the back of the, on the hymn sheet or whatever. It's like, then you feel bad, because
yes,
we should really be concentrating on hard things. But it is a completely consuming thing. Now I'm a bit more relaxed, really. I can just, it's there and I'm not going to change it. It's just done. So now it's just all about just trying to make sure getting it out as much as possible, promoting it as much as possible, and hopefully have some fun doing the gigs.
Well, I would imagine it's going to be nice. You'll be at the Red Rooster Festival in May, which we started.
Yeah, I should have tried to get some other festivals. I might be able to come up with a few others. It's always a way, It always seems to be whenever I'm trying to get the idea of trying to get a band together. It's like at the point where all the festivals are booked up for the year. But there you go.
Yes,
the next year it comes around quick, doesn't it?
Life does, which is always good. But look, Alan, thank you ever so much for giving me the time for this. And actually, if you want, I can always send you a link to this. And then you can put it on any of your social media platform sites, or your website, and hey,
sure, I will do.
Because people love to hear the story, and also just to get the word out that the book's there, because it is brilliant. Like when I started doing this, I know it's the indie world of the 80s. There wasn't that much interest in the 80s at that point. I mean, it was all very mainstream. It was told by people like Dylan Jones, and it was all Spandau Ballet, the Blitz Kids, Live Aid, and all that. And it was like there's a lot of other 80s, weren't there, happening, which were very different to that one. So I think people have gone and told a different sort of their side of the 80s, and in your case, other decades, really.
Yeah.
So there you go. But look, thank you ever so much for your time, and I will keep in touch. And thank you for
all right, then. Thank you, David.
Making it all happen. But been lovely talking to you. And
thanks. All right. Well, see you somewhere else sometime.
Yes, possibly in East Anglia.
Okay.
I had a book ride.
David.
Yeah, take care. I'll say goodbye. But have a lovely day or night. Bye-bye.
Cheers then.
Bye. Dear listener, is the end of the interview. I know, pretty obvious really. But a massive thank you to Alan for giving me the time for that. Talking about his life in music and also his new book. So please go and buy a copy. It'll make him happy. It'll make me happy too. So that was, How to Never Have a Hit. Available on his social media platform sites. This has been the C86 Show, David Eastaugh. If you want to contact me, yes, all those social media platform sites, C86 Show, you'll find them somewhere there. I just sort of got so bored of saying which ones they are. But also, all these interviews I've archived on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. Check them out. They're amazing. Anyway, have a great week. Stay safe.